for coming today. My name is Leon Cook. I'm one of the founder partners at Atticus Partners. This is the latest in our Ask Atticus series. By virtue of how many people are in the room, I think that is embryonic of how much interest there is in the work of the Foreign Affairs Select Committee and you, Alicia, specifically. We're very grateful to Alicia for giving the time today. There might be a slight issue with votes in the House, but we think we're just about going to be in the clear, but we'll crack on. So Alicia Kearns, she's been the member for Rutland and Melton since 2019. She's a former PPS. She's the first woman to hold the position of chair of the Foreign Affairs Select Committee. She succeeded Tom Tugendar. She's also on the Joint Committee for National Security Strategy, which I would say, in terms of what's going on in the world, is pretty important right now. She has had a plethora of roles in and around government prior to entering frontline politics. She's worked at the Ministry of Defence, Justice, the Foreign Office. She's advised over 70 governments on how to beat ISIS, led interventions in Lebanon, Syria, and Iraq.
That's the point at which I say I should have proofed the bio and said we'll do one sentence, and that's it. There's nothing worse than listening to your own bio.
No, but sometimes you should just lap it up, because what I would say is that I could go on for about 5 minutes, whether it would be your position on the China Research Group. I think you're quite outstated with regards to that. You've been a vocal supporter of Ukraine. We have people from Ukraine here in the room today. Well, I'm sure we'll talk about Gaza in short order as well. We have a number of members from the diplomatic community in the audience today, but rather than me warble on, so I think what we'll start with, if you could give a quick overview of how you see the world currently and what you and your colleagues on the Foreign Affairs Select Committee are thinking about, and then we'll get into the Q&A. So over to you.
So I think in my time as this role, I've really come to recognise just how precious it is. We are very fortunate as a committee to travel around the world, and I see how often foreign affairs committees are appointed by governments. They don't hold government to account, they don't hold inquiries, and essentially they use their foreign affairs committee as a platform for them to put forward their own political views and their arguments on other political parties within their countries. And so I think it's made me very grateful for the fact that we do have this ability to hold government to account, but also to put forward alternative priorities, to suggest where we think there should be a better focus. And last week we saw David Cameron was in Central Asia. I was delighted because a lot of the things he announced was exactly what we had asked for in our Central Asia report that we published, I think it was last April or May now. And so actually seeing that come to fruition, seeing the work that you have done, saying we need to pay more attention to this part of the world, this is how we can do it. Similarly with hostages, I've done a lot of work around state hostage taking and the kind of weaponization we're seeing of passports. When David Cameron came in as Foreign Secretary, he took that really seriously. And I said to him, this is one of the areas where the Foreign Office is not delivering on its core duties, which is keeping our people safe. And the reality is our people have never been so unsafe. We are in an incredibly dangerous time, whether it be autocracies working together, autocracies being more willing to be more aggressive in the way that they pursue their interests, whether it be terrorist groups, which again, too often I find that around the world countries can either focus on the threats from states who behave like terrorists or terrorists who behave like states. And actually we have to be able to balance both. And that was a big criticism that my committee did of the integrated review, where we felt that they downplayed counterterrorism, which is exactly why we're currently concluding our inquiry into counterterrorism. But beyond that, you've got nuclear ambitions that are getting stronger and stronger, more countries pushing forward with their nuclear ambitions. We've got more threats to economic security than ever before. I think one of the points that I've been landing for years, that you cannot have economic security without national security, that they come in that order, not the other way around, has finally landed due to the devastations we've seen around Ukraine, the stuff that we've seen around maritime movement being under threat from the Houthis, the threats to underwater sea cables. We're really starting to see the economists who didn't really see foreign policy as a core priority, recognising that it really is. So we are in a really difficult place. We need to hold our governments to account, but we also need to make sure that we work across countries. And what I've tried to do a lot as chair of the Foreign Affairs Committee is not just to be the UK Parliament saying X or X, but to bring people together. I brought together over 100 international politicians for a statement on Kosovo and the Balkans. I brought together hundreds again for statements on Ukraine and similar in all sorts of other parts of the world. And I think it's really important that we do speak as one and that we do reach out across parliaments. So those are some of the things we've been working on. I'm trying to remember what other inquiries. We're currently completing our inquiry into the Middle East and North Africa. Again, a part of the world we felt the integrated review had downplayed. Obviously, I warned back in January 2023 that we were going to see the Gaza crisis of 2023. I didn't want to be right. I didn't foresee it happening the way it happened, but that is why we're doing that inquiry. And we're also doing an inquiry into multilateralism because it is under attack. In 2020, we did a small review inquiry into this around how essentially certain countries are trying to rewrite the multilateral system. That has now been industrialized and they are trying to undermine it, not just rewrite it. So hopefully that gives you an idea of the sort of things we're prioritizing and looking at the moment as a committee.
Well, thank you very much for that. I can't begin to imagine which country or countries you mean that are trying to undermine the multilateral.
Too many, that's the problem.
I think that you are on record as saying that you are a one nationer, so the return of David Cameron would have been very welcome, I'm sure, in your view. As well as him going around the world basically projecting our soft power or hard power on the world stage. Last week there was an announcement with regards to the 2.5 spending commitment. Labour have now said that they will match that, but not identified in what time they will do that. You've just said something interesting about coalescing and coordinating votes or support on other issues. Do you think that there's going to be a domino rally effect on other governments, either in Europe or more broadly, RE defence spending?
I would love to say yes, but in my heart of hearts, I can't. 10 years ago, we said we were going to meet 2% of GDP on defence spending. The UK has met that, but almost none of our partners have. And whether it be partners like Canada, who are not delivering their commitments within NATO, whether it be within Europe, where too often, somehow, foreign policy and security doesn't play the role it should within domestic politics, that is where we are seeing countries not deliver on that. 2.5% is something I've been campaigning on for a number of months now with Michael Fallon. We really do need to do it. It's also about the UK not just saying that this is what we need to do, but demonstrating our commitment. Not only are we seeing autocracies on the rise, but we're seeing democracy shrink back. Democracy is becoming more isolationist, more populist sometimes, and also refusing to deliver on the commitments. So then when we say, well, we want more countries to turn to us, we want the middle ground, the global south to stay with us, respect a values-based system, the rules-based system, they can't do that if we don't show that we will be reliable partners. And that is where the 2.5% comes in, not least the other commitments we've made. AUKUS, the Indo-Pacific tilt, NATO, and also the reality that if by 2028, we haven't seen Taiwan, an invasion of them under the Great Rejuvenation by Xi Jinping, the reality is if the Ukraine war is still ongoing and we all have to hope and do everything we can to make sure that isn't happening, the reality is that the UK would have to step up and lead the defence of Ukraine within Europe, because America would have to go and take action in the South China Seas. America would have to lead there alongside Australia and Korea and other countries such as that. So it's also a reality check that if we don't act now, when times get more dangerous over the next decade, because unfortunately that is the trajectory, not that it's getting safer, we won't be able to do it if we haven't set up our defence spending and if we haven't put our defence industrial complex on that war footing that Grant Shapps has rightly said we absolutely have to do. And then there's the US elections as a final one, which is if we're not showing serious commitment across Europe, Trump will come back saying, look, I told you all, and however many years later, you're still not delivering. We can't allow that.
Well, I think we can all remember that summit in Brussels with Donald Trump, and I think your views on the potential return of Donald are quite well documented as well. But you just said something very interesting, that if there is a problem in the Indo-China Sea, that we will be the ones left to continue to fund and defend Ukraine. What could the Allies be doing more, and why should everyone in this audience and more broader than that care about it?
So we can all be doing more. There's no question, despite the fact that the UK has just made this enormous announcement of the biggest package of support yet for Ukraine. It is not enough because Ukraine is not being able to push back in the way it wants to. Its people are still being murdered. Its people living under occupation are still living under all sorts of horrors. We are not doing enough. And I always use this phrase, we need to give them enough to win and not just survive, because that is all we are giving them at the moment. And it goes to the point I just made about being able to rely on us as partners. Who was it who said to Ukraine they had to give up their nuclear weapons? It was us in the West. Who was it who promised we would defend Ukraine and protect them? It was us in the West. And I hate that, because I've just said that in my head. All I could hear was Xi Jinping or someone in Russia sat there clipping what I've just said, going, look, see, the West can't be relied upon. They won't deliver on their commitments. And that is something we have to turn around. But I think the narrative is one of the big problems, because we can do more. But we hear these insidious narratives about how Ukraine has to show us they can make progress. Ukraine needs to prove to us they can push through, that this won't be another failed offensive. They don't need to do more. And I really struggle with this triumphalism. And I've challenged it at conferences where Prime Minister after Prime Minister stands up saying, isn't it amazing that Ukraine's still standing? We're so proud of you. And then I'm the only one that stands up and says, I'm sorry, Ukraine. I'm ashamed that you are still having to fight. I'm ashamed that you lost Adivka, not for lack of will or trying, but because we did not give you what you needed to fight and to win. And I was in a country last week where a national security advisor told me that Lavrov and Putin have a deep instinctive fear of NATO, that NATO is a threatening force to Russia. And I said, well, you can accept that that's their narrative, but it's also your job to challenge it based on the facts around you and what you actually see. If we really were this aggressive force, then when you did your renewed illegal invasion of Ukraine, we'd have gone, this is our chance, right? We are going to go into Russia. We're going to take them down. We're going to destroy them. NATO has done no such thing in any way because we are a defensive alliance. And yet middle ground countries are seemingly unwilling sometimes to challenge those narratives. We need to freeze and seize. It is absolutely fair that the spoils of the aggressor should be paid to use to pay for the defence of the innocent and not all of our taxpayers' money when there is so much money sat there. The European Central Bank needs to get a grip, as does Belgium, and they need to make sure that we can use those funds, not least the interest. There is billions of interest just sat there, and they don't want to be holding on to it. So let's take it and let's use it. Equipment, we do need to get, again, the industrial base working because we're not getting them what they need. And we need to get them a path to NATO membership. And the US has said this is a red line. They've said we will not be giving Ukraine NATO membership in the upcoming NATO summit. But then the question is, what are you doing? Or are you relying on countries like the UK to lead once again, where we signed the Ukraine-UK security partnership? We've now seen lots of other countries do so. That isn't a backup. You have to do more than just that. And I think the final two issues with me are kidnapped children. We seem to have forgotten that there are tens of thousands of children still being held hostage by Russia. We would not allow this in any other situation. It's one of the few issues where it doesn't matter where I go in the world, countries care about the kidnapped children and grain. Those are the two things that seem to cut through. And then accountability. We cannot allow Putin, as we saw in his Tucker Carlson interview and every other effort, to rewrite history. And that is what he is focused on doing. So we have to fight the information war within our own countries. We cannot allow him to rewrite history as to what is happening in Ukraine and why it happened. And I fear that if we don't start doing that now, we are looking at a very dark winter, a winter where Russia has learned a lot. They've monitored, they've listened, they've reacted. They've got the Chinese drones, they've got the Iranian drones. The mines are everywhere. It is going to be dark, cold, deep. And they are going to focus on things like energy and anything that destroys the strength of the Ukrainian people. So I think we have to be really ready for what is going to be a very dark winter, and therefore make sure that we're giving Ukraine what it needs now while they can still fight.
We're not going to solve all of the world's problems in this room today, but I think you've touched on so many issues which have interlinking points to others. So, for example, the America used to be the world's police and we would back them up. But the Russians and the Chinese have been very clever for 20 years. For example, what they're doing now with BRICS or with the Global South. So using commercial diplomacy to basically allow them to provide security status to host governments and allow them to, through critical minerals, something I know that the committee has also looked at, seize those assets. Is there an answer to this that either the United Kingdom or its allies can remedy?
I think one of the ironies is that Russia is presenting itself as a developing country, a friend to the Global South, the anti-imperialist, when they are the imperialists. There is only one country who has industrialized and progressed with trying to bring back imperialism across Europe, and that is Russia. And yet when they go around the world, they are able to present themselves as this friend to allies, as someone who is equally being oppressed by the West, when it's a complete nonsense. So I think we have to be quite tough. And I think that I am the first to criticise where I think we are getting things wrong as a government. That is also my job. But there's a lot of phrases about hypocrisy. Oh, the West has been hypocritical when it comes to Gaza. Well, yes, there have been some areas where we have been hypocritical, but there's also a lot of countries around the world who refuse to help Ukraine, who refuse to say that it was a renewed illegal invasion, who refuse to say that Ukrainians are not Nazis. And so actually, we need to have some balance here. Throwing around words like hypocrites is not helpful, and yet that is exactly what we see. And the problem is when it comes to multilateralism, or where it comes to what our alliances are, we are not fighting hard enough. So I can sit here and criticise China, Iran, Korea, you name it, whichever countries it is, whether they're creating fake NGOs that go to the Human Rights Council at the UN and say how brilliant things are in their country and how awful things elsewhere. I could criticise them for the way in which they try and influence votes. But we, supposedly as rules-based countries, are not fighting in multilaterals every single day. We're not putting up our own candidates. We're not working hard enough to win the alliances and support of people. We're not delivering on the commitments we make. And until we do those things, we don't deserve to criticise multilaterals because they are made up of their member states. So I'm very, very critical of the fact that this is not just, well, they're on the aggression, they're on the rise, so therefore they're to blame. We also have a role to play in this and to fight back against it.
We are
not physically, just
for clarification. We are 6 months or more than 6 months into a war in the Middle East. I would say that Labour and Conservatives have actually come closer together in terms of their now adopted policy. Do you agree with that? And what would you change if you could?
So I do think we have almost complete unity within Parliament on Ukraine. Obviously, we've just had George Galloway elected. I don't know what his view on Ukraine is, but I suspect it's not one I want to hear. And around the world, parliaments don't believe me when I say that, again, putting George Galloway to one side. There is not one single politician who would stand up in the UK Parliament and say, stop defending Ukraine. There isn't one. They don't believe me. They think we must be mad. So I think it is good. And I love that my committee is one of the few places that you find unity across political boundaries. But you do also need challenge. And I think it's really important that the Labour Party identifies what does foreign policy really look like for them in terms of delivery? Where are they going to push back? Where are they going to try and push things further? And I can't say that if you said to me, 30 seconds, what is Labour's foreign policy pitch? I couldn't begin to answer it. And that, I think, is a problem.
Well, I think we could potentially apply that to lots of other areas of policy, but specifically on the Middle East and Gaza now, I would say that there's no cleavage between the two sides as well. So should we be doing more? And if so, how?
So yes, we should be doing more because there are people dying every single day and there are hostages who've been held hostage for over 6 months. So again, how can you not say that we should be doing more when you face that situation? The Foreign Secretary and his exceptional Middle East Minister, Tariq Ahmed, were in Saudi Arabia on Monday. They met with all the Arab countries, and they met in particular with those countries who have the most influence over Hamas. There is a deal on the table. It is a good deal. And we all know, and America's been clear, the UK's been clear, the only way that we end this is through a ceasefire, through moving forward to a political agreement and a political solution. It's very difficult for me because it doesn't feel like we've learned a lot of the lessons of the past. I spent a lot of my time before Parliament fighting to defeat terrorists. Hamas has caused so many problems within the region, not just within Gaza, but you cannot bomb an ideology into obliteration. There is no military solution to something that is driven by nationalism. That is not how you destroy them and defeat them. The best solution to defeat Hamas is a two-state solution. A Palestine that is independent with complete political transformation and a meaningful ability for Palestinians to divide their own future, which they have not been able to do. And an Israel that is secure and stable and does not live under threat every single day for a terrorist group who conducted, I believe, were crimes of mass atrocity on October 7th. But we haven't got there, and it has taken so long. And I really worry the last 6-7 months have dented the confidence around the world of particularly our younger generation in multilateralism, in politics. And that takes so long to rebuild. And so I think we're in a very dangerous place in terms of people believing that you can trust us and that you can make progress when, for example, there was a UN Security Council resolution for a Ramadan ceasefire. Nothing happened on the ground that changed. So I think we are in a very difficult place. And obviously there are lots of immediates, whether it be aid we can talk about, whether it be Rafah, we talk about, whether it be political transition. There are lots of things that need to happen. And we are also still, although there's a ceasefire deal on the table, there has been ceasefire deal after ceasefire deal after ceasefire deal on the table, and we haven't seen it end the suffering. And I really struggle with that.
For those that haven't, I would recommend they go and watch the last episode of Hard Talk with the former head of the Israeli Security Service. It's one of the most pragmatic appraisals of where we are currently today. I was literally struck by it.
Actually, if I can just on that,
by all means.
I gave an interview again last March where I said we had to learn how to be a critical friend to Israel, and that stands today. I have come under enormous personal attacks for believing that the IDF and the Israeli government are capable and can have the intent to prosecute this differently. And why do I know that? Because of my career working to defeat terrorism in the background. And there have been appalling people throwing out in the media stats like, well, the death toll is far lower than, for example, the operations against Daesh. That is a complete and utter nonsense. The way in which this is being prosecuted is currently making us less safe, as well as Israel, as well as her friends. And we want to be her friend, we want to support her, and we will help her, whether it comes to aid delivery, whether it comes to eviscerating terrorists who are trying to make them less safe, we will help them. But the way in which you prosecute a military operation, there are choices. And in Parliament, it is those of us who have a military background or a background in counterterrorism who are most frustrated, because we know it can be done differently. And that's exactly what you're hearing from inside Israel as well. So many ex-IDF voices, so many ex-special forces saying, we want this done. We want Hamas defeated. We want our people home. But the way you do this, there is a choice, and you can do it in a way that is more proportionate and that does not end up in a longer solution. And back to my point about learning lessons, Al-Qaeda and Daesh, would they have been what they are now, or what they have been for the last 2 decades without the Iraq War? No, they would not have been. And yesterday at my committee, we had the former head of MI6 giving evidence to us, and that is exactly what he said. So this isn't just some political posturing. This is an accepted reality within anyone who has worked with the security services or worked within counterterrorism. Our actions shape our stability and our safety in the long term. And I am very fearful. Until about 3 years ago, the #1 radicalising narrative in the world, the entry point or the entry drug, if you want, for terrorists, was the situation in Gaza.
Using my position as chair, I'll ask one more before we open it up for questions. This is in 2 parts. I think the first part is almost rhetorical. Which election do you think of the 64 this year is going to be the most pivotal? It might be the world's policeman. Yeah. And do you think this year will demonstrate the strength or fragility of democracy across the globe? Proper Jean-Paul Sartre, Freud one.
Parts. I don't think it's about one election. I think it's about the cumulative effect of what happens in elections around the world. So we look at the EU elections, that's going to be really pivotal. That is going to be really fundamental. In some ways more than the US, because we know who Trump is. And yes, don't get me wrong, he'll be off his leash if he comes back, and he'll say, right, all those things I didn't get to do last time, I'm here and I've learned my lessons and I'm ready to go. But the EU, I think, will be really, really interesting in terms of what that means for European security and European solidarity, which has been tested over the last few years, but actually has managed to stay whole despite that. I worry that we will see more populism and we will see more of the use of hatred within elections, the demonization of others, and the repeating of conspiracy theories that are just not true, because I see it in parliaments around the world. I also think that the UK elections will be very interesting, but not on foreign policy. I think they'll be interesting in terms of our domestic policy and where we go. But I would say the EU elections are probably the ones that I think would be genuinely most interesting, because we just don't know where they're going to take us.
Very good. Right, well,
but you can all tell me if I'm wrong.
I'm sure they will. We'll open it up now for Q&A. For those watching online, you can submit your questions and we'll get to those as well. So if I could ask you to identify yourself before you ask your question. So,
sorry. Do you mind passing it across? I'm just going to see what my whips are telling me.
Conservative whip.
This is the joys, the beauty of democracy. But do go on.
Anyone in the room? Otherwise, I'll keep going on. Okay, I've got another one then. China. Yeah. So what do we do about China? So the procurement bill, I think you were quite active and vocal on that. If you happen to work for a quasi-governmental Chinese company, you might think that the knives are out for you. Obviously, we've seen the vote in Congress vis-a-vis TikTok. Do you want to see more of this, or what is the threshold by which it is punitive, too much, or not enough?
So I think when it comes to the Chinese Communist Party, we have to demonstrate our resolve, which is that we will protect our own people and protect our interests. But do we also need to make the point that we are not a threat to China? We are not seeking conflict with China, but what we want to do is maintain the rules-based system and protect our interests and protect those of our democratic allies, and that we will stand together. Now, that's quite an easy, lofty statement to make, but I do think that point around us not being a threat to China is something we don't say enough. Very briefly on the TikTok bill, I would not want to see that repeated here. I think it was a very poor piece of legislation. And I think what we are seeing in America at the moment is if you put the word China or the Chinese Communist Party into a piece of legislation, anyone will vote for it. They will just pass it, they'll put it through, and it's become this amazing political football. That's incredibly dangerous. It's a bit like Taiwan. I really worry about the way the US legislator is making Taiwan this really important political football. But what they're not doing is making sure that, again, if we get to 2028 and Taiwan hasn't been invaded, they're currently creating a situation where we'll be able to say to Xi Jinping, we wouldn't, but they might, we stopped you. We stopped you completing that great rejuvenation. And that's not something Xi Jinping can afford to live with or to deal with. So where are the off-ramps? And the way that they are, the TikTok legislation was just badly drafted. But also, I am a libertarian. So although I did get it banned on work devices and government devices, it is down to individuals to make their own choices. And that is why every time I visit a school, I ask if they will ask me a question about TikTok. When we get to Q&A, I say, please, one of you bring it up. And the amount of kids who do go home and delete it amazes me. The fact that they actually listen to a politician and go and act on it. But what I want an informed national conversation where young people and adults say, I'm going to choose not to engage that piece of technology because I understand that I have a responsibility towards national security. It's not just the government to keep us safe. I have a duty as an individual, a bit like in Sweden and Finland. They have such a deep sense of personal commitment and responsibility towards the protection of their own country, something I'm very envious of. I want people to make those choices, not when there's a risk of government data, hence the block on government. In terms of China more generally, we have to recognise that the threats of transnational oppression are industrialised. We have to do more to protect our people at home. It is unacceptable how weak we have been in response to some of these threats. A comparison I will make is that last week we saw 2 sets of spies taken forward to court. One spying for the Russians, well, one reportedly spying for the Russians and one set reportedly spying for the Chinese Communist Party. One of them, we saw the Russian ambassador called in and we saw lots of cabinet ministers tweeting about it. The Chinese reported spies, we did not see the Chinese ambassador called in and we didn't see cabinet secretaries tweeting about it. In both, the police said that they were aiding and abetting the enemy. But the UK government doesn't declare Russia the enemy, nor China the enemy. So our police are operating on one basis and our government on another. There's a big disconnect there. So we have to get serious about transnational oppression. The Iranians, again, are a great example of this. Tech authoritarianism, going to the TikTok point, we need to educate our young people. We need to protect our technology. We need to strip out those, the body cameras that are being worn by police officers going into British people's homes that can be sent back to the CCP at any point. That all needs to go. We need to stop them rewriting the multilateral system. That comes down to us. We need to embrace the fact that information warfare is vital. Look at the Houthis. The fact that we saw people on British streets protesting and saying that these were heroes, resistance fighters. The Houthis don't care about the Gazans. They've done nothing to help the Gazans. They hate Israel. They've hated Israel for a long time. They're anti-Semitic as you can be. But their actions are not in defence of Gaza in any way, sense or form. But rather than recognise that in the weeks leading up to it, and obviously the first attack was in November, we had the time as allied countries, those of us who decided to take action to protect the maritime freedom of maritime movement, which again, so many countries want to attack us for it, yet they're all benefiting for it. We are taking the action so other countries can say they're middle ground to their friends to all and they don't take action. We've got to have a bit more of a grown-up conversation. But my point around that was the fact that we have months or weeks where we could have been telling the public who the Houthis are, the fact they brought back child slavery, the use of child soldiers, rape, you name it, and we didn't roll the pitch. So therefore, when we suddenly announced we were doing airstrikes, that allowed Russian, Iranian, you name it, what other disinformation efforts to come in and capture the hearts of people on British streets. I had people attacking me going, how dare you attack the Houthis? You don't know who they are. I know exactly who these are because unfortunately I've had to deal with them in the past, not personally obviously, but through my work. So we need to roll that pitch and be a bit more serious about it. And then the economic subversion bit and the economic entrapment is really serious. And I don't think we have taken note at all of how bad the espionage is, how bad the entrapment is. So we need to do that quite seriously. And it's a whole of state response. This isn't just Foreign Office, Defence and Home Office. Every department, look at our university's announcement. Very welcome. Again, something I've been calling for 4 years, but we're finally getting there. Universities, we have to deal with any backdoor that is allowing hostile influence, that is silencing speech, or worse, is recruiting people to conduct their operations and interests on the ground.
I think we're okay for time, is that right?
Yes, no, we're fine. Votes are coming early today. Oh wait, my whip has also texted me. Looks like we'll get past. Right, keep going, we're fine.
Okay.
There we go.
Very good. I've got one coming online. What assessment does Ms. Kearns make of British and French projections of soft power in Africa to counter Wagner forces, particularly when the FCDO is so poorly staffed in North and West Africa?
So Wagner is obviously an issue that we've been talking about for a long time for a Foreign Affairs Committee. So long before Prigozhin's march on Moscow, we started our inquiry into the Wagner network, and it should be called the network because it is vast. It operates on at least 4 continents. And our great frustration was, despite evidence that for well over a decade now they've been operating in Africa and all sorts of other countries, the Foreign Office and the MOD and government itself were prioritising running the Wagner group from the Ukraine team. That made absolutely no sense. It was absolutely emblematic of the problems we have, where we see transnational actors undermining us, causing enormous harm, and yet we deal with it only from one focus rather than doing it realistically. So I can't talk about everything the government did in response to our report because some of it is not public, but they made systematic changes to the way that they're dealing with the Wagner network. We saw a lot of sanctions. It's the first time a Foreign Affairs Committee has ever commissioned a piece of research and actually provided a list to government of who should be sanctioned and what we wanted to see happen. So I think there has actually been a big transformation of how we deal with it. As for UK and French influence in Africa, I think they are 2 very different things. I think there are a lot of criticisms that have been made of both. But I wouldn't lump them in the same group. We are not paying enough attention to the Sahel. We are not paying enough attention to what is happening there, to the neighbouring countries. We're seeing some economic warfare. We're seeing some suffocation of food supplies going on. And of course, we're seeing the spread of armed governments run by militias. We should be very worried about that coup belt, and we should be very worried about the Sahel. And as part of our counterterrorism inquiry, we spent a lot of time looking at that. So I'm not going to say now what we're going to say in our report when it concludes, but you'll see there's a lot on the Sahel and the result of UK and France withdrawing, particularly from Mali.
I don't know if you have the chance to interview David Cameron prior to the publishing of that report, but our record, and particularly in the Maghreb, he might have something to say about during his time as Prime
Well,
Minister.
I can't say the date, but watch this space.
Fair enough. A question in the room from Finland.
Thank you very much, Ambassador of Finland. Really good to listen to you, Alicia, as always. You mentioned several times multilateralism and the international rules-based order. Now, we are not in a position at the moment to start salvaging or rebuilding it, unfortunately. But if and when we are, and if you happen to be the Foreign Secretary of the UK at that time, what would be, in your thinking now, the first parts that you would concentrate on recreating an international rules?
So I have to say I don't know the answers yet, and that's exactly why we did the inquiry. So I never do inquiries if I know what I want the answer to be or the outcome to be. I do it if I think I genuinely don't know. And on multilateralism, we've only done 2 hearings so far. I don't know what the answer is. I know we're in trouble. I know people's confidence is undermined, both the public, as I touched on earlier, but also countries around the world who say to me, it hasn't changed at Bretton Woods, it doesn't represent us, it doesn't support us. The government's obviously announced that we support UN Security Council reform. The committee may have some differing views on the way in which we go about that, but even member states themselves have very different views. So for me, I don't think the UN is going to be on the table, and I don't think that's the way to go about it. But we have to look at, in the past I have talked about that for the UK's personal interest, we need a constellation of alliances. That is what's going to keep us safe. So whether it's the AUKUSes or whether it's the NATOs or whether it's the JEFs of this world, that is what will keep us safe as a small island nation. So that's my priority. The Commonwealth, for me, is really key for multilateralism. We do not do enough as the UK, recognising that the Commonwealth could be an incredible asset. We don't do it. We don't do enough support the security of our overseas territories, which is why, again, I've launched a subcommittee focused full-time on overseas territories. So I don't know what the answer is, but over the next 7 weeks, that is what I'm going to be spending all my time thinking about, is not just what will make the UK safe when it comes to multilateralism, but what will increase investment from countries around the world who currently are probably divesting themselves of some of the multinational systems because they don't believe that we are equally committed, or they don't believe it delivers for them. And then we've got BRICS, which is a whole other world of joy.
Okay, online we have another one. With David Cameron's recent visits to Central Asia, do you envision the UK continuing to expand relations with emerging markets in the near future? I'll add my piggyback to that is, how would you say that business and trade and FCDO work together in this enterprise?
So there's obviously DBT and for FCDO in London, and then there's posts. and the two rarely meet, and there is a big difference in approaches. You know, there are some posts where the trade team are absolutely part of the main Foreign Office and they work so well together. There are others where the trade team don't come to morning meetings, feel themselves to be very much a separate entity, and that is a problem. It should be one HMG because that is what other countries are doing so well, but we are not doing well at that. We have just become the fourth biggest trading exporter in the world. That is an incredible achievement. All those people who want to say, well, where's the proof that we can do more exports? We are doing it. Fourth biggest exporter, we're the UK. We are a small island nation. Yes, we always punched above our weight, but that is a real success story. So in terms of where we go in trade, there's a lot more to be done. No, there is not enough coordination, but the problem is not just between the two London silos, but also on the ground. But that's also where we see problems, for example, around sanctions, human rights compliance. One of my big frustrations has been that we haven't taken enough action against the genocide in Xinjiang. That sits between, because you've got DBT, you've got the Foreign Office, you've got DESNED with an energy interest. These need to all sit down together and have a meaningful conversation. There is too much division, too much sided working, and this is what those who are opposed to our interests are really good at. They decide what the singular strategic focus is of their country, and they all invest in it, they all focus on it, and they get it done. We do not do that. It is not good enough, and we have to do more. And that's why we need a cross-government China strategy, but we also need a cross-government human rights strategy. There are many other things we need that we do not have at the moment.
I'm going to talk about the dreaded B word, not Boris, but Brexit. So it's been asked of me.
It could have been the Balkans.
It could have been. It could have gone in multiple different directions. Everyone can read polls. A week is a long time in politics, but what will be the next chapter of our relationship with the European Union, do you think, given that the accession treaty is pretty clear vis-a-vis currency, and I don't think that could be stomached by the British people, and if you're ready for Brexit, you can't have a single market access. So what is the answer to this conundrum? And I think that we could talk about what the Irish have been saying this week post-Rwanda. It's all one big soup.
Yeah. So when I was elected in 2019, obviously, we were at the height of kind of difficult relations and the height of the divorce. So everyone was angry, everyone was upset. You couldn't go into an international meeting without people saying how angry they were that you were leaving, and actively angry, not just sad. And I would always say, look, trust me, we are still going to be part of Europe. You know, I did vote to leave, but I'm still a proud European. I just didn't want to be part of the European Union itself. What's happened since then, however, and the EU ambassador himself will say this, is we've moved past the angry stage of the divorce, where now you've got shared interests, you might even have shared children, who knows, and you get on with it and you make it work. The Windsor Agreement was a fundamental turning point, and I give enormous credit to Rishi Sunak for having got that through and made it happen, because it did make a big, big difference. Now we need to move on to, for example, Horizon, which again is really good news. We do need to get a youth mobility visa in place. I think that is really important. We want our young people, we want to benefit from the soft power that we have, but also other countries have, and come together. I think this is where you do see the biggest political divergence when it comes to foreign policy. The Labour Party have been very clear, and their members are very clear on every single trip we do, that they will force closer alliance with the EU, that they want to see a formal foreign policy agreement, they want to see a formal statutory move on. It was me that said to James Cleverly, you need to go to the EU every quarter. I want to see you go to Brussels. And he went to Brussels. He did exactly as we asked as a committee. Please go. Show that you will go to Brussels, show you want that relationship. But to those who still say, well, we need ever closer, the UK still isn't a reliable partner, Ukraine shows that is not the case. The UK I was sent to Ukraine back in 2014 to help the Ukrainians fight against Russian disinformation, because back then we knew there's problems, and obviously there was the first illegal invasion. The UK has consistently shown ourselves to be the strategic partner that Ukraine can rely on, the first to give things, even if it wasn't exactly what they wanted. How much more does the UK have to do to show that we are absolutely committed to European security, that we are still here and we are still going to play our role? But no, we don't want to be part of an ever closer union. I don't support the idea of some kind of cross-EU defence agreement, because I don't think the European Union can come to agreement. I don't think it's in their best interest, and I don't think it would deliver meaningful peacekeeping operations. Absolutely, the EU could do that and contribute to that. I really struggle whether they go in foreign policy. And the Labour Party isn't clear what they want with the EU. They just know that they want as close a relationship as possible. We had a hearing on this as a committee. We were very divided on political lines. It was the most bitter hearing we probably had, where again, the Labour Party members were saying, and the SNP were saying, we want to sign a formal treaty, an agreement with the EU on foreign policy. And then we on the Conservative side, and also a lot of our witnesses were saying, but why? What's the benefit? What's the reason? Do we want to see a regular pattern of engagement? Yes, we do. Do we want to see regular exchanges? Yes, we do. But why sign a document that doesn't actually meaningfully mean anything? So I think there is a challenge to Labour. If you do say, and this is what you want, closer relationship with the EU, define exactly what it means and what the difference is. It's going to make tangible difference to our security and our relationships. But just saying, oh, we're the nice guys and we want close relationships and we hate Brexit, that's not foreign policy. That's just political posturing.
Thank you very much. W. Ivanovic, I'm acting head of the Croatian embassy. Unfortunately, I also have the fever.
That's all right. And I'm going to have to go off this question.
There was the House of Lords International Relations and Defense Committee end of January issued a report and said that government should review its approach to the Western Balkans.
Mm-hmm.
And they said in the background, as they explained, that tensions in the Western Balkans had recently escalated.
Yeah.
Would you agree with that? And what do you think? What shall be done in order to de-escalate those tensions? And what should be the UK role in that?
Yeah. So the answer is deterrence. Deterrence that is actually upheld, but it isn't new. The situation in the Balkans has been getting worse and worse and worse since 2019 when I was elected. When I came to Parliament, I had a very clear wish list of requests. Republic of Srpska should not be able to raise money on the London Stock Exchange. They have now been stopped from doing that. I wanted a sanctions regime in Bosnia, so if we deal with Dodik and the others, I got that. I wanted us to bolster KFOR, we did that. And I wanted us to rejoin U4 in Bosnia. I didn't get that, and I'm still working on it. Although Lord Cameron did say yesterday that he thought KFOR was a better investment of our time. It is about deterrence. Where is the balance? And this is where the UK outside of the European Union could be really powerful, because the EU and the US are not getting it right. Banska is the best example of that. Again, I warned in June that we were seeing weapons being smuggled illegally into Kosovo in ambulances and stored in churches. Now, it wasn't a church when it came to it, it was a monastery. But exactly what I predicted happened. At the time, NATO and others said there was no evidence what I said. But if any journalist had asked, is there intelligence showing that what Alicia said is true, they would have had to say yes. What has been the result since Banska? We saw a terror attack on Kosovan soil where they had trained and armed, where? In Serbian military bases, not just on Serbian soil, in Serbian military bases. The weapons they used were modern weapons built in the last 3 years. The serial numbers lined up. This is not just some ragtag group that have got themselves some serious equipment and gone into Kosovo and decided to cause some trouble. Appeasement doesn't work. When I talked about imperialism in Europe, yes, Russia is the only one that's currently pursuing it. But what are we seeing in the Balkans? Far too much conversation about imperialism again. Far too much hatred and demonization. The rejection and denial of genocide and Srebrenica that we saw at the UN this week. And we've seen Vučić say that, like Azerbaijan, Serbia will just wait for its moment. It is really serious, and what happens in the Balkans matter. If we think we're currently seeing a crisis with these two, if we don't pay more attention to the Balkans, we will see more. That's why I asked the Foreign Secretary to go to the Balkans. He went to Kosovo in January. He has had multiple conversations. But even, today, Xi Jinping saying that Serbia is going to be invited to join BRICS. Okay, well then make a choice. Because the US and the EU keep wanting to say that Serbia is pursuing a Euro-Atlantic future. Well, yes, they are taking 60% of the EU's budget, despite the fact that there's many countries in the Balkans. But are they? They haven't joined us on sanctions against Ukraine. They're the only against Russia for Ukraine. They're the only accession country that hasn't. They continue to support Russia, including signing a security agreement with them 9 months after the renewed illegal invasion. They've just made Alexander Vučić, is it deputy president? He's come back into Serbia, having gone to be a senator in Republic of Srpska, despite being sanctioned by the US government for being a drug lord. None of these are positive signs, but there is no deterrence. And I'm really sorry, the whips have texted me and said that wind-ups have begun, so I am going to have to run at incredible speed. So I'm so sorry to have to cut short slightly.
Not at all. In 15 seconds or less, if your title wasn't chair of the Foreign Affairs Select Committee, but it was Foreign Secretary, what area of foreign policy doctrine would you change and why, if you could do that in 15 seconds?
Hostage taking, because our fundamental duty is to keep our people safe, and we are not doing a good enough job of keeping our people safe, and we let the geopolitics get in the way when actually you can do the two at once.
There you go. There's a reason we chose this office, for proximity to the House. So
I'm really
with that,
sorry, everyone.
if you could thank Alicia in the traditional way.